Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Darsha.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare. Hey everyone, welcome back to Medicine Redefined. This episode is going to be a rebroadcast of episode 45, where we hosted Louisa Nicola. So if you don't know who Louisa is, she is a neurophysiologist, and she has so much knowledge when it comes to optimizing brain health and also just human performance. She is the founder of Neuroscience, and she works with world-class athletes around the world, trying to help them improve their cognitive abilities on the field or on the court, as well as just athletic performance in general. She is also a scientific advisory member for companies such as Tonal, FitFlight, Clora. She even has an exclusive partnership with the supplement company Momentous. She's also the host of her own podcast called The Neuro Experience. So in this episode, if you have already listened to episode 45, I think this is going to be a great listen again. This is one of my favorite episodes that we've done on Medicine Redefined because there's just so much information. And as you'll listen, Louisa is very energetic, and the way that she can convey information is very contagious. So you will learn a lot. But we're going to go through Louisa's background. We'll touch on sleep. We'll touch on brain health. We'll touch on supplementation. So there's a good amount to learn on this. So don't be afraid to hit that rewind so that you can absorb it all. Okay, so enjoy this episode, and I'll see you at the end. All right, everyone, we're back here with another episode with a special guest, Dr. Louisa Nicola. How are you? You know, this has been a long time coming, and Altamash and I are super excited to talk about this because all three of us are athletes here, and you delve into the realm of neuroathletics. But first, you know, it's crazy times right now. How are you doing? You're in Australia. What's going on?
Hey, guys. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. How am I? I'm actually fantastic. So I flew home. I live in New York City. Born and raised, obviously, in Australia, moved to New York in 2016, and every year I come home for Christmas break to see the parents. And this time I decided, just because everybody's working from home now back in New York, I usually only come home for 2 weeks, and so I've come home for 2 months. So I've got a month left. So look, I am fantastic. It's beautiful here. I'm surfing every morning. I'm running. I'm loving it. I've got a fantastic tan for those of you who are watching us on our video.
Well, I'm totally jealous. I just took a winter trip to Austria, but being in the sun right now sounds amazing because it's freaking cold out here on the East Coast, at least. So you should not be missing New York City. So Louisa, let's just delve right into it. How did you? So I know you were a pro athlete in your teenage years doing triathlon, and that journey had some ups and downs, but it led you into this world of neuroscience. Take us through that journey.
Interesting. So I don't know how much you know about Australians, but we are pretty much born in the water. And so I grew up as a swimmer, always loved swimming, always loved surfing. And so I was a very strong swimmer, and I loved being outdoors and being athletic. And I remember this word triathlon, somebody mentioned it, okay? And I thought, what is triathlon? It wasn't in the Olympics at the time. It first came into the Olympics in 2008. So before then, I hadn't been in the Olympics, and there was a triathlon just occurring in my hometown. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it. I like doing all of this stuff. So I raced it, and I ended up winning. I think it's just because I was a strong swimmer. So that's when I started my triathlon career. I thought, this is incredible. And that was pretty much the spark of everything as it relates to high performance, physiology, neurology, neuroscience, athleticism. I put everything down to triathlon. You know, an endurance athlete, you have to learn how to, just beat, unbeatable things that happen in your mind, in the environment. So, I was a triathlete. I raced for Australia. I went to Beijing. I went to London, and then I finished my career in Auckland. And that was, I was 22, 23 at the time.
A quick question about that. I've talked to quite a few triathletes, and I've often heard that if there is an event that allows people to gain the most separation, it's swimming, because not a lot of people tend to be strong swimmers. Is that the case? Is that where, like, you want to spend most of your energy on if you are maybe not the best overall triathlete?
Well, here's the thing. I was always the first, we call it the lead pack. I was always the first out of the water. I was a very strong swimmer, but, being a strong swimmer this is why I think Australians really excel when it comes to triathlon, is because we learn how to swim in the ocean, and that's where triathlons take place. So if you can learn how to navigate, first and foremost, the water, the environment, you have to wake up. You don't know what swell we're going to have. And then if you can go around the buoy, which is, a kilometer, 2 kilometers out, learn how to really maneuver around that and get back into the leading pack and then get out of the water. And there's so much technique involved. If you can get out of the lead pack there, if you can be an intermediate cyclist, then you've pretty got a really good head start. The reason why I, called it quits, for a number of reasons, but first and foremost, I'm not built for running. So that let me down. I got some podium finishes, which is what got me on the Australian team. You have to be top 3 podium finisher. But look, when I stopped my career, I was 13th. I would never be able to get number 1 just because my body isn't built for running, unfortunately.
So, fast forward, you mentioned 2016, you came to New York City, right? You've got neuroathletics. You're doing amazing things. You're working with high profile clients in both the athletic sector and the business sector. What was it that led you down the path of neuroscience? I mean, it's not the sexiest thing that people think about, right? I mean, no offense, it's challenging. It's very, very complicated. But what was it? Was it a personal journey, like, adversity that you fell through? What was it?
Yeah, there was a number of things. First of all, when I graduated high school, I was I wouldn't say lost, but I was heavy into triathlon. And you know what it's like, 17. I was 17 when I graduated. I just wanted to be world number 1 triathlete. Didn't think of anything else, as you do at that age. And my parents said to me, they were funding, it's an expensive sport. I had to buy bikes and they were funding it. And they said, the only way that we're going to keep funding this is if you go to university. I thought, okay, that's fine. So I went and did exercise physiology and teaching. And I thought, you know what, I'll become a teacher so I can just go to work and then train in the morning and train in the afternoon. And when I was in, when you do an exercise physiology degree, you go into a lab and you go in and you play with cadavers. And that's where I learned, oh my God, I'm obsessed with this. I'm obsessed with human anatomy, human body, etc. So I loved that. I knew that about myself. And then what happened was in 2011, so I had graduated, and I ended up going on, I know it's a weird pathway, but I ended up going on and doing a master's of mathematics. So I was just very good at mathematics. I loved it. I have mathematicians in the family, so I went on to do mathematics, and I applied my thesis to anatomy and neurology. But we'll pause right there, and I'll tell you that in 2011, I was due to go overseas and race in Beijing. And 2 weeks prior to that, I was hit by a car, and it was very devastating. So I had to forfeit my title. The next person up got my seat on the team, and it was really tragic. It was a tragic moment for me. I snapped my legs, my collarbone, my arm, and I was out of action for almost a year. So it was really traumatic for me. And I remember I still went to training and I just sat there because I had teammates. So I just sat there every day. And my coach said, we've got somebody flying here. And his name was Bobby McGee. At the time, he was Usain Bolt's running coach. So he flew from Colorado, California, wherever. And he said to me,
somewhere far west.
Somewhere. I hadn't been overseas. And I was like, it was in 2011. He goes, you can get back on the bike and you can be an even better athlete than you were before. And I said, how? And he said, it's not through rehabilitation and gaining strength and cardiovascular health. He said, I'm going to teach you something. It's all in your head. It's about your brain. And he introduced me to an EEG. And he put a cap on me. For those of you who don't know, an EEG is an electroencephalogram. We use it mainly, back then we were using it mainly in epilepsy wards and sleep analysis. So he put this on me and he took me through a triathlon in my mind and he recorded my brainwave activity. And something happened to me right then and there. I didn't really know too much about the brain. We did neuroanatomy in college and school. And that's when I became obsessed. I thought, oh my gosh. And so I applied his methods. I literally started training my brain. This is in 2011. We're in 2022 right now.
Wow.
And because of people like Andrew Huberman, people are starting to understand what the brain is. And this is way back when. And I thought, I'm applying neurology into sport, and I fell in love. I said, that's it. I have to go to med school. I have to become something to do with the brain. That's all I knew. So that's how it started.
But ultimately, you decided not to go to medical school.
No, I didn't decide that. That was the next step for me. That's what I did. Yeah, in Australia.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So
we don't have in Australia. We don't have. Sorry, I cut you off. We don't have MDs. We have MBBS. Yeah.
Oh.
So instead of going through the pathway of becoming what you guys are, going through and doing residency, I thought, no, I just want to get my studies done. I want to get my degree. I want to get my medical degree, and then just apply that to sport. And that's what I did. I started in Australia, and by chance, I flew to New York, and I was picked up in 2016 by a very, very well-known athlete, and that kind of started my career.
Interesting. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really cool. I find this fascinating, right? I think a lot of people who are in the athletic sector and performance, right, such as you are, we have an athletic background, and that was the case for me as well. I was nowhere near the athlete you were, right? But I had this passion for sports medicine at early on in my life, and I knew that, hey, I really know what it is like to be injured, and I can really empathize with the patient. And so, for early on, before I even went to medical school, I knew I was going to do sports medicine. I know what path I was going to get there. And as I've started to learn more and more, much like you, exercise physiology, initially introducing myself as a musculoskeletal expert because, that was cool, biomechanics, all this stuff. And then the more we learn in our primary specialty in PM&R, we do a lot of neuro rehab as well. And it's interesting because the musculoskeletal system doesn't operate until the neurological system asks it to, right? And so you really need to understand one before you can understand the other. And so now I've started introducing myself as a neuromuscular, not really an expert, still learning. But it begs the question is, you've had this injury, you've got this passion, and now you've got this company of neuroathletics. So is it something that you're saying, okay, like, hey, I've got this passion and I want to help other people recover, and now you've translated that into the business sector as well? How does that transition happen?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So first of all, I love your theory of it starts with the brain. I always say that the brain's like the federal government. It starts there, and then we go down from there, and vice versa, in a bidirectional axis, which we'll talk about later. But so my theory was I wanted to have literally a business which was the intersection of the brain and athleticism. And I was working with a very well-known soccer player back then, and he said to me, he goes, Louisa, he's like, what's your business name? And it was the night before I was to work with him, because he had to bill me. I sent him an invoice, and his manager said, we have to invoice you. So I literally, in that moment, I just said, okay, well, neuro and athletes. And I literally went on in Australia, and I found a business name, and that's how I started the creation of neuroathletics. But it was literally the intersection of neuroscience and athleticism. And basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to show athletes and teams that they can perform better, think faster, and ultimately live longer, which is what we want for all athletes. They have an expiration date. Live longer by understanding their nervous system. So, and everyone says to me, but Louisa, can you work with me? Can you work with me? I say, well, if you have a brain, then that's yes. So at that time, I was working with all athletes. It didn't matter, I was working with a lot of boxers. We have a lot of fighters in Australia, a lot of soccer players. But it wasn't until I moved, and it wasn't until I would say 2017, 2018, that I really honed in and said, I'm only going to work with NFL athletes, because there was a lot of, TBI concussions. I thought I can really make a dent in that space. I want to work with NBA players because I like the sport. Okay. And I thought I really want to work on the cognitive aspect, reaction time, visual acuity, etc. I really want to work with them. I think it'd be great to work with a ball sport. And then soccer, I grew up on soccer. I never played it, but I'm Greek, and we are very big soccer fans. And I said, I just love the sport and I know the sport. So I just dedicated myself to those three sports. And then, in the last 2 years, the company has expanded into the financial sector. We now work with portfolio managers, we work with day traders, we work with investors, and that's been really fun too, because I think that they are just like athletes as well.
That's amazing. Louisa, you talk about, you guys have your stories, right? And exactly what you're talking about is optimization, in every single aspect. And that's how I got interested in rehab medicine and, becoming an athlete. For me, I wasn't always the strongest growing up. All I had was speed. I was really fast. But it always came down to looking at other people's weaknesses and seeing what I could do to gain strengths. So this is why this topic's so fascinating to me. And you just mentioned cognitive, visual acuity, reflexes, all these things, which we will get into. I want to switch it to sleep for a little bit, because I know you're very passionate about sleep. And I think sleep is probably the biggest driver that we're starting to understand. I mean, you mentioned Andrew Huberman, and he's got a lot of episodes on it. Matthew Walker just came out with a podcast on it. So you call sleep the most or the highest performance drug. Why is that?
Yeah, I love that. I call it the most underrated high performance tool that we have. And I think it really is, for a number of different reasons. But I will preface this by saying in Australia, if you go and do any medical degree, we've got a very different medical system in Australia. I know it's like we're both dealing with but it's completely different. But in Australia, if you want to be a surgeon, for example, you go and do your medical degree, then you have to go back and do a master of surgery. Anything, you have to go back and do a master of medicine in surgery, in anything. So I knew that I loved neurophysiology, literally, which is what we're speaking about here. But it's, when we talk about neurophysiology, it's about, we look at epilepsy, we look at how does the brain relay to the body what to do, and how does other things like the body, how does that affect the brains, when I mentioned this bidirectional axis. So I went back and I did Master of Medicine in neurophysiology. And that's where I really understood, because we go into surgery, we do intraoperative neurophysiology, where we learn how to drop electrodes into the brain. And a really big aspect of the learning curve in there is sleep medicine, because when you do a sleep study, you have to go into a lab with a neurophysiologist. And that's where I really understood, wow, it's not until you're in a sleep lab that you understand what sleep really is. And it is so powerful. It can literally detect things such as Parkinson's disease 20 years before its diagnosis, which I think is during REM's behavior disorder. But when you're in these labs, you understand what the body goes through during sleep. And there are some amazing things that happen that I think, wow, we are all rushing out to get the latest nootropic, or we're all rushing out to get the latest cycling gear or the running shoes, but we haven't nailed our hydration, our nutrition, or our sleep. So let's talk about sleep. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Do you think it's worth breaking down the stages of sleep and kind of just going in?
Yeah, I'll do a brief. I won't. I'll briefly outline some of the stages that we have during sleep. So the first 3 stages, stages 1, 2, and 3. We have a 4th stage as well. But the first 3 stages happen from the moment that we're starting to fall asleep. That's stage 1. We're going to stage 2, light sleep. Then we're going to stage 3. Now, these 3 stages are comprised of what we call non-REM sleep. It stands for non-rapid eye movement sleep. So they're the first three stages of sleep. Now, amazing things occur during these 3, and I'm only going to focus on stage 3 because it's what we know as deep sleep. For those of you who wear a Whoop strap or an Oura ring, for example, if you check your metrics the next day, you'll see REM sleep or deep sleep. You can see your score. And during deep sleep, we have so many things that occur. We have things such as the release of human growth hormone, and this is responsible for what? Protein synthesis, muscle repair, and recovery. I think, wow, okay, so we don't really, if we're optimizing our sleep, I thought if we're really optimizing, which is we're really getting into deep sleep, then we don't really need to be taking, to an extent, I say this with a caveat, we don't really need to be taking all of the protein powders and all of these supplements and doing all of this stuff unless we've got deep sleep really, optimized. So that was the first thing I was like, oh, that's interesting. And there's another thing that also happens in these stages, and also during REM sleep too, which is this next stage, stage 4. When we go to sleep, we activate this system. I think it's a wonderful system. It's called the glymphatic system. And basically, so we all knew until 20 years ago, we all knew about this lymphatic system in our body. We went and got lymph node massages. Is that what they're called? Lymphatic massages. We all knew about that. How can we clear out all the toxins in our body? It wasn't until about 20 or 30 years ago that neuroscientists saw that we have a lymphatic system in our brain. It's called the glymphatic system. The reason why it's called glymph is because we have these amazing neurons in our brain called glial cells, or these brain cells, I should say. And basically all of the CSF, the cerebral spinal fluid, it goes through your brain. If anybody's watching me, I've got a lot of hand movements right now. Basically, all of these glial cells, they move out of the way, and we have these systems, these fluid systems that just go through the brain. It clears out all of the toxins, all of the gunk that's occurred in your brain and in your nervous system throughout the day, and it gets cleared out. I thought, wow, that's interesting, because imagine waking up in the morning and feeling, so much clarity and not having a headache and not feeling that kind of gluggy feeling that you feel when you don't sleep. That's because the glymphatic system has kicked in and it's cleared out all of that. I thought, that's amazing. Wow. So if we have that optimized, we don't really need caffeine or performance enhancing drugs. So that was great. And then we move into that REM sleep stage, rapid eye movement. Just the reason why it's called rapid eye movement is because when you're in a sleep lab and you're hooked up to the electrodes, you've got these electrodes on your eyes. What happens is your body, your eyes are going through this thing, and it comes up on an EEG as horizontal eye movements. So you can get some vertical ones too, but 90% of them are horizontal eye movements, which is why they came up with rapid eye movement. And this is where we're getting a lot of our memory consolidation happening. So a lot of our learning takes place during this time. And they say that, a lot of sleep scientists say that you should be having 20% of your total sleep time in REM sleep. So I think, wow, so much is occurring during sleep that is just so fantastic for us as athletes and as individuals, especially in the finance space. Why are we not talking about this more? So I think it's something that we need to be looking for. I think everything starts with sleep when it comes to athleticism, and if we can be optimizing for that, you'd see dividends in your performance.
Follow up on the REM sleep. So I've heard that statistic several times, right? But I imagine, much like anything, there has to be a large amount of variability, right? Whether it's through different stages of our life, right? I mean, I think as we get older, like we know people in their 50s and 60s, my understanding is obviously, their overall sleep quantity tends to lessen, right? And so they're also going to curtail some of the REM sleep. So have you found in your practice that maybe as people go through different phases of their life, they have different amounts of REM sleep? Because again, as what we're going to talk about later, you tend to track a lot of these metrics as well.
Oh, look, everybody has, you're right. As we get older, a lot of things decline. One of them is REM sleep. It's also deep sleep and total sleep time. But everybody is different, and REM sleep can be really modulated by a lot of our activities. For example, we know that things such as bright light is going to block REM sleep and some deep sleep. There's certain medications, antipsychotic drugs, a lot of other different medications that actually go in and block REM sleep. And then there's a really wonderful thing which has only come to my attention, I would say, in the last 6 months. I've put this out there in a podcast and on a newsletter, the Neuroathletics newsletter, and that's around vitamin D and how having vitamin D deficiency can really go in and affect your sleep, especially your REM sleep. And so that's a really fascinating finding. So everybody's going to wake up, like for example, another big one is alcohol. I should mention alcohol really goes in and completely plummets your REM sleep. But I've been having a glass of wine each night with my dad. He's a big winey, and, I don't spend that much time with him. So we've been having a glass, and my REM sleep is 8%. It's usually 21, 22%. I thought, wow, this is fascinating stuff. So, yeah.
Now, I was just going to ask real quick. I think I saw an Instagram post of yours saying, though, that wine probably affects you more. So do you think that alcohol has, a variable effect on different people? So for instance, if I take a glass of wine, I'm not going to see as much of a drop as you would?
Yeah, well, it might be. Everybody's different. Obviously, it's like
Okay.
how you metabolize it. However, it really comes down to the active ingredient in alcohol, which is ethanol. That acts as a sedative. And you've both done. I'm guessing you've both done anesthesiology rotations, I think,
Mhm.
and we all know what propofol does. We all know what happens
Right.
when you go in and you have an IV. It sedates you, so you're not getting into sleep. And this brings up another important question surrounding marijuana use. And,
Mm.
almost all, a lot of the athletes that we sign do say, well, Louisa, to calm down, I smoke a joint every, maybe 2-3 times a week. I go, no, please don't, because you're not actually getting into sleep. It may be calming down your nervous system, but you're sedating. That's what you're doing when you have alcohol or another form of sedative. You are sedating yourself. This is why I lobby against prescription sleep pills or sleep
Mhm.
medication. I really, Ambien. It's another form of sedative. So you're sedating yourself. You're not going into those deep sleep and REM sleep stages.
I'm curious, with the wine example you gave, have you noticed if you curtail that drink at a certain hour in the evening that you tend not to have an effect?
Well, yes, it's because there's a half-life, just like caffeine.
Mhm.
But that would mean I'd be day drinking at midday. And that would be a
Right.
bit more of a problem because I'm not 21 anymore. So yeah, look, if I have it at 9 p.m., then yeah, completely different to having it maybe at 6:37. But look, I give myself a lot of slack because of my culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That begs the question, though. Remember, I one of the people that Darcy and I do listen to quite a bit. Of course, Matthew Walker. I think we're all fans of him here, his book, and then he's been on Peter Attia's podcast quite a bit, and they've talked about the different interaction of various drugs and sleep. I think at length, and I don't know if it was Peter who said this or not, and I think that when we're having these discussions with patients, right? So let's just take alcohol, any type of these sedatives, right? There's something to be said about the fact that it calms down the nerve, right? And it overall, if it just lowers, maybe not actually clinically and objectively lowers cortisol, but just takes the edge off the anxiety. Because one of the things that people have challenges, with their sleep latencies, they're in bed and their mind's just racing and stuff not. And if just a little bit of alcohol or marijuana or whatever your medication drug might be takes the edge off, is there something to be said about looking in the larger clinical context? Hey, in the grand scheme of this might be beneficial because you might not be struggling with chronic sleep deprivation.
Well, are you saying that in the short term, if it does lower cortisol and it kind of settles down your nervous system, is there merit to having it?
Yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is if over the last 2 years,
Yeah.
people have been, maybe not everybody, but I think just the general state of anxiety has been at an all-time high. I think we can probably agree with that, right? For obvious reasons. And I think that perpetual stress has a role in being able to get good quality sleep,
Mm,
right? And
absolutely.
I'm certainly not, I'm not saying that anybody should be using these type of sedatives and medications and whatnot. But I'm just wondering is how do you take that into account? I mean, you do this on a day-to-day basis, and I don't.
Mm.
And if somebody comes in like, look, Louisa, like I understand what you're saying. I see the sleep metrics, I see my Whoop and Aura Ring, but here it helps me.
Mm.
Are there instances where like, you know what, in your case, taking everything into account, taking the history that you're talking about, I think this is okay. Let's work with how we can bring it back to a glass or, whatever it might be.
Well, depending on how much they're having,
Yeah,
you don't just want to go cold turkey on somebody who's having,
of
six
course.
because of, stressful reasons. But no, with a lot of my athletes, they're only doing it really to decompress. And there are other forms of that. And we really help them with that, stress relieving strategies. We can even look into certain types of nootropics. For example, for when you have a sleep complaint, a lot of patients have got two chief complaints, and that is I have trouble falling asleep. That's the first one, or I have trouble staying asleep. And two of them offer two completely different forms of you're going to be dealing with them in two different ways. And then let's talk about the former. I have trouble falling asleep. Okay, well, why is that? Well, Louisa, when I go to sleep, my mind is racing. And by the way, that's something that happens with me a lot. My mind races. And right now I feel like I'm on 3 different time zones. So my mind is constantly, my phone blows up like, when you guys are waking up, it's like 11 p.m. here, my phone's blowing up.
Yeah.
So I go, okay, well, what do we know about that when the mind is racing? Well, we know that we have, anywhere from 80 billion neurons in our brain nerve cells. And in order for us to think a thought or to produce anything, these 2 nerve cells have to fire together. It's called a synapse. And well, okay, so they're obviously going at a very rapid rate because we're thinking so much. How we really settle those down? We have a chief inhibitory neurotransmitter, and it's called GABA. Well, gamma, it stands for gamma amino butyric acid, and it's our chief inhibitory neurotransmitter. So what does it do? It's a neurotransmitter that goes in and inhibits the action of all of these action potentials from firing. So this is a naturally occurring neurotransmitter in the brain, in the body. So let's see what we can do. Let's supplement with this and see if it calms down our nervous system. That's just one healthy option that we can take. The second thing might be optimizing your environment around you so you can start to decompress and not have those racing thoughts prior to going to sleep. And I always give my athletes an out. I go, I say, try all of my tools first. Try everything. And if all else fails, after 2 months, have your glass of wine. I haven't had one yet over so many years. It hasn't worked yet. Yeah.
Let's go into optimizing sleep then. Yeah, because you work with athletes and you actually even go to their hotel rooms, to kind of situate. Take us through that process. So you go through that door. What are you looking at? What are you doing?
Well, first thing I'm looking at is I find out what mattress they're sleeping on. Okay, that's the first thing. One thing I make all of them do is I make them travel with their own pillow. The reason being is that we want them to be able to have an optimized sleep, and something that you can obviously imagine this as well. When you go to a hotel room and you're sleeping on different pillows, you just know it's not your pillow, it's not your home. So I make them travel with their own pillows. But when I'm looking at optimizing the room, I'm looking at the temperature of the room. I'm looking at what type of mattress they're sleeping on. Sometimes I try and get them to sleep on an 8 Sleep mattress. So my company has got a partnership with 8 Sleep, and they are, I believe, they are the leaders in the sleep fitness technology company. So their mattress cools down and it heats up according to your heart rate and sleeping rhythms and patterns. So I think that's incredible. I look at how dark can the room get. I really want to get blackout curtains. So these are some of the things. I make sure that everybody's got their eye mask. A bathtub is a really big necessity in the hotel rooms. But I think, if I had to nail it down to something that everyone can do for an actionable tip to enhance the performance of their sleep, it would be looking at your temperature. So let's talk about that. So we have a homeostatic core body temperature. What is it in Fahrenheit? What's
98 degrees.
98 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's that's what we need that's what we're all at baseline homeostasis, we call it. Now, what we know from the literature is that in order to fall asleep and in order to stay asleep, our core body temperature needs to drop at least 2 degrees below our Fahrenheit level. Now, how do we do this? It's very hard because we think, well, can we do this with the thermostat? Okay, and that's called ambient temperature. That's changing the temperature of the environment. We know that doesn't really have an effect on our core body temperature. So unless you've got somebody waking up throughout the night and cooling you down with ice packs, the only real way to do that after that is via a mattress or a cooling blanket, if you will. So this is why we partnered with 8 Sleep. So we got them to give all my athletes a mattress, and the guys just go in, they lay down, and the mattress just cools down with them. So it keeps them asleep. And it detects, some people are hot sleepers. I don't know if you guys are, but there are a lot of men, big men as well, who are hot sleepers. So the mattress picks up on the temperature, and it's like, oh no, he's getting too hot. We're going to drop him down even more. So it keeps your body at a cool state. So I think that's a really important thing for everybody to know. Sorry. Yes.
Now, what's with the bathtub? What's that about?
So well, bathtub is for other purposes, such as I like to, in order to like really calm down your nervous system, sometimes I suggest a magnesium bath. Okay. Which, if you've had a magnesium salt bath, I don't have a bathtub in my New York City apartment, but here I'm in Sydney, I have a bathtub. And when I have my bath at night, oh my God, it can just put me to sleep. It's incredible. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's a lot of science that shows that when you heat up your core body temperature, you get a dramatic drop after that. So I like to suggest this because it brings all the blood to the surface of the skin and makes you hot. And then your body has to push hard to bring it back down to that homeostasis level. But in doing so, it drops it down even further. And then later through the night, it lifts it back up. So it's another way, if you don't have a cooling mattress, that's another way of manipulating temperature.
I like that. I mean, as opposed to just taking a shower, you can do 2 for 1, right? Do the magnesium and take a hot. So a quick follow-up for the 8 Sleep partnership that you guys have. I mean, a lot of these NBA players, I mean, they'll be in the city for one night. I mean, I can't imagine they're taking the mattress with them. So are they getting multiple mattresses to different cities? Like, that's pretty amazing.
Well, so we have designated rooms around the city, especially in New York City. Yeah, you have to come to Louisa, Nicola to get that. No, but we do have different hotel rooms that have got these mattresses in there, and they're specifically designed for this purpose. So when somebody's flying in, they can stay in that specific room. And it also comes with a cover. Like you don't just have to have the mattress. It comes with a cover, which is what I did. I've just got the Pod Pro cover. I put it on my mattress. So that's one way. But back to the bathtub. Another great reason to have a bathtub is you can always turn it into an ice bath. So, yeah.
No, I think to your point about, the ambient temperature and sleep, and I've written about this before too. I mean, maybe 5-6 years ago, probably a little bit longer than that, is when I really started learning and appreciating that, I need to optimize my sleep quality. And I was like, okay, well, of course, where I'm going to start? I'm going to start at the mattress. And as I started learning more and more about sleep and, going through medical school, you're pretty sleep deprived too. So, you really want it more than anything else. I was like, just absolutely fascinated by it. And I shared this funny story because I just thought about the irony. I'm one of those people, I think, much like Darcy, probably much like yourself. And, as we start learning more, you get excited and you go down this rabbit hole, right? And this is shortly after I'd gotten married. And I just was learning about different mattresses and sleep quality and temperature changes and whatnot. This is before, I think, 8 Sleep. I don't know how long they've been around, but one morning, it was like maybe 2:30 in the morning, and I'm still there studying about sleep. And my wife just woke up and he goes, "Do you not see the irony of the situation? That you are staying up in the middle of the night, sacrificing sleep so you can learn about sleep quality." And I was like, wow, that's most amazing and insightful. And I'm a ridiculous person. Sorry, that was a little tangent, but I haven't used the Pod Pro cover. I recently heard your episode when Justin Medeiros talking about it. I think that's going to be an attending purchase. I personally use the Uller by Chili Technology. I got to say, honestly, that's been an absolute game changer for me once I can appreciate it. And especially when you can control at what time the temperature changes throughout the night. I know you can do that with 8 Sleep as well, right? Different stages of the night, you can have different temperatures. So that's been incredible. Yeah.
It connects with your phone and you can set it to whatever. And the great thing is if you sleep with somebody, you can separate the bed into 2. So if you want it to just go to 0 and -1, -2, they are not the temperatures. It's just the gauge of the, the settings. And your partner wants to sleep at maybe 1, and it's completely different. So I think that's amazing too.
Now I'm curious about the 8 Sleep. You wear an Oura Ring, yeah?
I do, yeah.
So, but the 8 Sleep has its own internal tracking system.
It does,
is that correct?
Yeah.
So the sleep adjustments are automated by that tracking system, or do you do a manual inputs?
No, they're automated by that tracking system. And then so every morning I wake up and I check both, But so here's my theory, and you would know this, just like an EKG. When people are wearing HRV, you can't really detect HRV as good as what an EKG can. But it's just like the Oura Ring. It's like, well, this is amazing, and the Whoop strap and the 8 Sleep, but nothing's going to beat an in-lab PSG. So you have to get the next best thing. And what do we know when it comes to science? We know that as many different data points can help us get there and give us the quantifiable measurement that we're looking for. So I look at everything, but so far I feel like the Oura Ring is the most reliable out of all three. There's a lot of controversy around that, but there's also a lot of research around that. I found a great PubMed article that links this type of wearable. I think it says it's around 86% of a PSG. So that's the closest that we have to a wearable.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty solid. I mean, 80%. And again, I think we talked about this on previous episodes. We use these wearables to give us insight, right? In order for us to change behavior, not necessarily just give us data, not to do anything with it. But yeah, I've got the Whoop, and I mean, it's the same thing. I'm just kind of using it to gauge my behavior, which again, I have these blue blockers on right now because I'm a little jet lagged. But you mentioned HRV, and I know you're a big fan of tracking it. Can you kind of break down what HRV is for the audience, and then how do you use it with your athletes?
Yeah, so it's HRV. You've probably seen it on your Whoop band or your Oura Ring. It's pretty much I would say, scientists don't like saying the average, but it's pretty much a measurement between the autonomic nervous system and I feel like I've gone too far with this. I feel like I need to take a step back and introduce the nervous system. But we've got a sympathetic nervous system and we've got a parasympathetic nervous system. And basically one is about stress, okay, and one's about rest and digest. And we want to know, well, how many times during the day am I getting into that stressful state? And we do this via, when we're exercising, but when we're at rest and we're activating the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest nervous system, we're in the parasympathetic where our heart rate is completely down. It may be at 60 beats per minute, maybe at 54, depending on how fit you are, your age, etc. And we want to know, well, how long during the day did I spend in both? And it pretty much says the average of these two systems. And when we look at this, the reason why I love it so much is because with HRV, it gets manipulated through sleep. When we're looking at a wearable such as the Oura Ring goes through and actually tracks your HRV in the early stages of deep sleep. So that's when it gets the HRV tracking. The Whoop strap does the same thing. It tracks it overnight. So this is why it's really important to wear your wearables at night and tracks. And in the morning, it delivers you a result. And what we've found is that the more recovered you are, the less stressed you are and the healthier your body is functioning, the higher your HRV. So we can use this measurement as a predictor of performance the following day. When we're jet lagged, we haven't slept well, our body is constantly in that fight or flight, in that stressed mode, high inflammation, low cardiovascular health, then our HRV, heart rate variability, is going to be lower. So it's pretty much we're looking at the variability of the different systems that we got into that day. And I think it's a great predictor. We didn't know HRV prior. We had to go in and get an EKG. You have a little lead that's strapped up here near your clavicle. And it was also a great measurement of cardiovascular health. But now that we can do this at home, it's a great predictor of performance the following day, how well you've recovered or how well that you're going to be in a game, for example.
How long of a period do you ask your athletes, or for you personally, to have the data for the HRV? For instance, is just one night of wearing the Oura Ring at nighttime sufficient to predict performance, or do you want 24 hours of data?
I am tracking their daily metrics. Like I have a back end, so all of my athletes are wearing an Oura Ring, and I'm on the back end, so they can't lie to me. So I'm literally tracking them 24/7, and I'm seeing a lot of trends. I think, well, okay, how come your HRV was so low here? And then I look, oh well, he just traveled, he's jet lagged, HRV has completely plummeted. Or he could tell me, I could look at his sleep times and think, wow, he slept great, but why is his HRV still low? It could be infection. It could be mental stress, emotional stress. Mm-hmm. This is the things we need to take into play, or it could be COVID-19. So I'm looking at more than a 24-hour basis. And also it takes time for your body to track. You have to wear it for about 2 weeks for your body to really understand your systems. What's your highest recording HRV?
Mine is, I'm like a 50, my highest.
But you it might be different on the Whoop, right? In terms of how they present it, or is
I
it
don't
the
know.
same?
No, it's pretty much the same.
I
Is it
think
the
it's the
same?
same. Yeah, I'm like a 50. And that's what I was actually just going to ask you is like, how much genetic variability do you think there is? Like me and my brother are probably around like 50, highest 55. But I kind of hang around that 40 to 50 range. Like
Lisa's
if
looking
I,
at you like,
yeah,
what?
if
Crying.
I'm like above 70, because you're at like 120, aren't you?
Well,
More than that.
yeah, I'm more than that. And I thought, oh my gosh,
Oh
well,
gosh.
I've got a history of AFib in the family. I thought, oh my God, going at but I was like, shit, no, because I did record. This is how I got the attention of Whoop. It was about a year ago. I recorded. I had a 210. And for a week, 210 HRV, and I kept putting it my stats up, and they contacted me like, "Can we do a study on you?" So now I was like, "Oh my gosh, maybe I've got AFib," but no, everything's fine. So I was very healthy, but now it's sitting. I would say my greatest like average is around 180. So if I'm down at like 48, then I know, what have I done? I don't think it's ever been 48, but maybe if it's been around, if it's been around 96, I think to myself, wow, I've done something wrong.
I'm
That
waiting
is
for
really
the day.
interesting, though. I've talked about this before. I think that when I first got, so I don't use the Whoop. I use the Aura Ring as well, and initially probably wore it consistently for about 2.5 years, and really dialed down the information that I needed to optimize my sleep regimens that work for me. And then I kind of put it away because I think I was in one of those camps where it was starting to become detrimental to run to check my sleep score in the morning for a while. I don't seem to have that problem now when I throw it on from time to time just to make sure everything is cool. But interestingly, my wife and I welcomed a baby not too long ago, and that first 2 weeks where I was, thank you, but the first 2 weeks I was sleeping like 4 hours a night, and I had my highest that I've ever seen. Interestingly, I was at 188, and I was like, well, this makes no sense. So I found that to be very curious. I'm not really sure what to make of that, but that was interesting.
Were you exercising?
Yes, but only like 3 times a week. I don't know if I did it that day or not, to be honest with you. I don't remember.
Maybe it was mistaking your activity, for exercise and thinking, well, he's going great. But then, lack of sleep is it can really plummet the HRV. Interesting.
So on the note of your HRV, I kind of want to take a somewhat of a short turn here. I remember you mentioning, I forget which podcast, maybe it was on like with Matt Dawson or Wild Health podcast, about the correlation or the alterations in HRV post TBI, right? And so I see a lot of sports-related concussion. Actually, both of us see, in our training, we see moderate, severe, mild TBI. But for the sake of this discussion, we'll keep it to mild TBI. You worked with a lot of NFL athletes, you said in the past. How is that affected? And like, what does HRV tell you post-traumatic brain injury? Mild traumatic brain injury?
Well, look, I think it's great when we can have these metrics. Not a lot of my boys were wearing them at the time of concussions, but let's just step back a bit and talk about this, because it's something that's been, ever since this Antonio Brown thing went insane. I'm like, let's open everybody's eyes to the fact that concussion should be really, looked at in more than just sports medicine fellowships. They've actually introduced now, the American Academy of Neurology have now introduced a sports neurology fellowship, because concussions are so under-recognized. And the reason is that I think that even, we're getting mild concussive hits with every single time that we go out. Even when my soccer players are headbutting the ball, they're getting some form of collision to the head. Okay, and what do we know? Well, we know that when you get hit to the head, the brain starts to like go back and forth and hits the skull. So we've got all these metabolites, all these neurotransmitters just going wild. So it's going to mess up the brain in some way. The fluid, everything's going to get messed up in some way. So I was finding that the first 48 hours post-concussion, whether it's mild, whether it was just light or severe, you see a massive downturn in HRV. Now, in terms of like the why to that, my only suggestion can be the increases in neural inflammation. We know that inflammation is another predictor of getting into that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system state. So we know that that's going to have an effect on the, for 2 or 3 days afterwards, it's going to have an effect on the HRV. I haven't gone too much into the depths of understanding the complete correlation, but that would be my understanding. It would be the increase in neural inflammation. But that's the first thing. The second thing that I could suggest is it probably has something to do with temperature as well. We know that when if we heat the brain up to a certain amount, you can fry the brain. You literally can. And we've seen this in multiple studies. And what we know when we are concussed, you can probably, weigh in on this. Do you know anything about the temperature of the head post-concussion? Does it increase?
I personally don't know.
Well, so 2 years ago I was approached, and I was working, a lot. I was in New York, and I got approached by the university that I used to attend, I attended University of Sydney, but it was actually University of New South Wales. They reached out to me. There was a lab there, and they were working on a cooling mechanism post-traumatic insult. Pretty much like they were working on, how can we get a neck cooling device for if someone gets hit on the field, we can go through and just cool them down immediately, because you get a raise in your body temperature increases, and the temperature of your head increases, and that's what's going in and actually messing with the brain metabolites. So that's where I haven't really gone into it, but I thought that was really interesting. So I'm thinking that also has another effect of how it plays into HRV.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the proposed mechanisms in terms of, again, sports-related concussion, but really any type of TBI, is the alterations in metabolic activity, right? And that's where the PET scans and some of these advanced imaging modalities come into play as well. I know that, staying on the note of TBI, but don't want to dive too far into supplementation, but you are passionate about EPA and DHA. And in fact, before we started, you had to get your daily dose in.
Yes.
And, one of my journal club articles that I did this year for our sports-related concussion was the efficacy of DHA as a protective agent for mild traumatic brain injury in elite football players. And it's actually started in boxers. Again, coming back full circle, you talked about working with that. So what is your understanding of the evidence of using, I think, both EPA and DHA, but as far as I understand it, DHA maybe a little bit more so for neuroprotection. Is that fair?
Yeah. To make it really simple, because I do go into this a lot, but to make it really simple, first of all, I believe, and I get in so much trouble for saying this, if you're a boxer or you're an NFL athlete, you have a death wish. I've said that. I've actually said that to Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, in front of his face. Didn't go down too well. So that's the first thing, we know that. Second thing is, let's look at we know that the brain itself, it's like a hunk of fat. Most of the fat that it's made out of is DHA fat, so we know that this is comprised of, we know that if we're going to fish oil, it's comprised of omega-3 fatty acids, which is EPA, DHA, and ALA. Correct? Okay. So ALA is more found in flax seeds, and it's more for the plant-based vegans out there. But then we've got EPA and DHA. These are the two things that I supplement with. So EPA does have more of an efficacy when it comes to neuroprotection, but where EPA comes in is it has a really great effect on lowering inflammation. So before we got on this podcast, I remembered I have 2 grams of EPA in the morning, EPA, DHA, and 2 grams at night, because I try and get 2 grams of EPA and 2 grams of DHA all day. So 4 grams completely together. So why do I have this? I always have a circulating amount of omega-3s in my blood in order to bring down the neural inflammation and bring down just the inflammation in my body. So it does have a major protective mechanism for athletes. Any type of fat diet, actually, there was a great study that was done, and it was in Nature journal, I think. Nature, really, really, high stringent, high quality journal. And I forget the title of it, but I've prefaced it so many times, and it was about post-traumatic insult. Within the first 72 hours of that insult, having a high-fat diet and ketones actually aids and speeds the recovery of these TBIs. And I think it goes in by way of fat being, the primary source, and glucose being like, do we want to feed the brain with what it's made out of, or do we just want to rush glucose to the brain when it needs it? So I think this whole realm of DHA and fat to help the brain and protect it is a really great thing. I think everyone should be having EPA, DHA, like everybody.
So taking that strong stance that you have on this matter, how do you work with your vegan athletes who maybe, don't want to do that?
I don't have any vegan athletes, thank God. Yeah.
If you did.
If I did, it would be, it would be more high dose ALA because you can't mimic the effects of EPA and DHA just from ALA alone. And there's a lot of people, there's a lot of veganistas out there who attack me about this, but it's just, I just go by what the evidence suggests, and then you just have to work around it, I guess.
So interestingly, I think that this is a question that I've had a couple of times, and come to learn that like sources like algae sources are the source, right? I mean, Darsh, you know better, but do you want to say something about this one, or?
Sorry,
Louisa, yeah.
No, Darsh.
Oh no, so I was going to say, so I'm a vegetarian, just been born one, grown up, not vegan.
Oh, we're going to stop this podcast right now.
But so what they say, right, is that if you're taking the fish oil, the way the omega-3s are coming from the fish are from the algae. So the algae itself is the source of those omega-3s. Thoughts on that, I guess, is what Altamash is kind of leading here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that we talked about is we actually did a whole podcast on algae, actually. But, obviously acquiring those, algae-based food sources, at least here in the United States, it's much harder to do. Maybe in the Far Eastern cultures, it's a bit easier to do. And the other thing I think worth noting about ALA, and Darsh and I talked about this offline before, is, your body will convert it, right? ALA to EPA and DHA, but there's a rate limiting step, right? Not everybody has the enzyme, and the activity of the enzyme is a little bit different too, because I think walnuts are another great resource. Is that correct, right? That's another source for ALA as well?
I think so.
Can anybody check me on that?
Yeah,
yes,
I think walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, those types of things, yeah.
But that's
awesome.
what you said was really important. The fact that it has to go through this two-step process,
conversion,
right? Mm-hmm. It goes through first ALA, then it has to convert. So it's just like, well, instead of going through that metabolic pathway, let's just take the EPA and DHA. And if you take a really high quality supplement from a great brand, which is what I advocate for, you're not going to be getting that fishy taste.
If you feel comfortable disclosing, what brand do you like for your EPA and DHA?
I only use Thorne.
Yeah, I was thinking Thorne.
Yeah,
okay.
Not partnered with them. I honestly, I've looked at their regulations. I've looked at the way that they manufacture it. I've also looked into all of the multiple studies that have been done on the manufacturing process of some over-the-counter drugs, and you just don't know what they're lined with. So if they haven't got a good reputation, I don't know why people just buy ginseng over the internet on eBay and just take it. I'm like, what are you putting in your body?
Yeah. They're NSF certified. Yeah, right. That's what is it vitamin E that you're using in terms of to protect from oxidation? What is it that they use in their EPA DHA? Is it like rosemary oil or?
No, it's not. It's I don't even have the bottle in.
We can look it up. That's not even important.
No.
So I want to come back to sleep. Right. Because this is one of the things that you're an expert among many. And, one of the things that we're starting to learn is maybe we don't have causative evidence yet, but we do have correlations for you talked about sleep or the lack of sleep and adversely affecting performance, right? Both cognitively and physically. But of course, being a physician and a sports medicine provider, I see a lot of people who get injured. What do you know, or what do we know about the interplay between sleep and risk of injury?
Oh gosh. Well, like I mentioned earlier, okay, if we're not getting the proper secretion or release of these vital hormones such as human growth hormone, responsible for protein synthesis, we're not going to be properly recovered the next day. Okay. But not just that. I always go, as a good scientist, you always go in and dig a little deeper. Why? What else happens when it comes to injury? Now, I know a lot of people who have, especially in the NFL, who have gotten an injury because maybe, just maybe, in that split moment, they didn't see somebody coming on the right quadrant of their. Why is that? Lack of sleep can do more than just not release certain hormones. Lack of sleep can go in and, there's been studies that have been done where there was an ultra adventure runner. I don't know what you call them, but she had to run for like 3 days. And what happened was the race was over 3 days. So you want to try, what they did was they were only sleeping for an hour each night, having a power nap. And on the third day, I think on the second or third day, she started hallucinating. This is what happens when we are sleep deprived. This is what happens with people who go out and they take drugs that keep them awake. They are keeping themselves up and they start to hallucinate. Then that plays merit into, if you're a bit sleep deprived, if you're having maybe 4 hours of sleep one night, you can induce a tiny bit of psychosis the next day. You can induce your cognitive capacity can go completely down. Then you might miss the ball, or you might miss a catch, or you might just be in the wrong way and someone can just charge at you and you can be paralyzed within a second. So I look to that as well. I don't just say that injury can be caused because lack of sleep, because of not a sufficient amount of hormones, but it can also be because your body is just not fueled enough to be able to do the right movements that can cause an injury. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
it's hard sometimes when I see something in my head, it's like to put it out there, but that's my thinking as well.
No, it makes sense. I mean, right, sleep is that primary driver, but without it, there's a ripple effect, right, that leads down to so many different things. And actually, I was just going to ask you that. I have so many questions right now, actually. So let me try to figure out what I want to ask you here. So, all right, in regards to sleep and TBI, you just mentioned cognitive decline, right? So you're seeing your athletes, especially in football and boxing, I'm sure, going downhill after a certain time period, right? In the other sports as well, is there a certain age or a certain years of athletic experience that you're seeing where they start to fall off? Because I think sports science is at an all-time high right now, right? I think, a lot of people give Tom Brady credit, but I always step back and say, well, look at almost all the sports. In tennis, you have Federer, you have Djokovic,
I was about to say that.
Yeah. You have Ronaldo and Messi. I mean, in basketball, you have LeBron, you have Steph Curry. I mean, these people are well beyond the peak years, you could say in quotes. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of the cognitive decline? Are you seeing it at a certain age or a certain amount of years after they have that athletic experience?
Yeah, I always say that elite athletes come with an expiration date. You're getting a decline in performance. I can't believe you brought up Djokovic. Right?
Sorry, you're
as an
Australian
Australian.
Right now.
That's really upsetting that you brought his name up.
I'm a Rafa fan.
I won't get into I won't get into that. I was in Melbourne. I just got back last night from Melbourne, so I won't talk about that. But let's look at a beast of all beasts out there, and that's LeBron. What's his age now? Is he 30?
37, 36?
At least 37, maybe 38.
And he's at his prime. He is just absolutely incredible. If you saw him on the Tonal advertisement, his body is unbelievable.
37.
It's like, 37. So, it's like, at what time is he going to start to decline? We're seeing all of these amazing, young guns coming through. It all depends on, first and foremost, it depends on what you're doing every day, what your genetic makeup is, what you're ingesting, and how you're refueling, because everybody's cognitive. Everyone can decline. That's just what happens over time. We decline depending on if you're declining at a rapid rate due to, if you've got an allele for Alzheimer's disease, or if you're just declining because of inflammation or age, you can slow the progression of this via lifestyle interventions. So, I mean, at most athletes, what I'm seeing is that at around 34, that's when they're really starting to call it quits. They're getting injured more. I've got an athlete, who's been out a lot of this season because of a hemi injury. Then he's going back and forth from Chicago to New York, seeing surgeons and everything. So things start to weigh in on you at around that 34 mark.
So let me ask you this as well. I mean, athlete structures, I'm sure day to day are pretty structured, right? I mean, there's not much wiggle room. So aside from sleep, what else are you doing kind of during the day to optimize their recovery, or if they have a low HRV that day?
I utilize ice a lot. Cold immersion. It's something that I really believe in. And like I said, I got, the attention of this, the study that was being done on post-traumatic insult and cooling that really got me excited, because there's this pathway that gets activated neurally when you're getting cold. It's called the RBM3 pathway, but there's so many different things that occur during cold thermogenesis that I absolutely love. It can really help you mentally, okay, feeling good, feeling vigilant, feeling focused, but it also does so much for you neurologically and physiologically. So one of the things I do outside of a window of 3 hours pre and post training is 12-minute ice bath. I think I really, really believe in that. When it comes to recovery, I believe in that. Saunas, I obviously I believe in. There's a lot of merit, but if I had to choose between cold bath and sauna, I would choose a cold bath. So those two things and hydration are probably the three biggest things that I fall back on when it comes to recovery.
Why is that the case? I've heard a lot of talk about heat shock proteins, right, in terms of recovery. I think you might have been the first person that I heard about cold shock proteins from. But my just very rudimentary understanding is, in terms of the evidence behind sauna for longevity is much more robust than it is for cold therapy. But you mentioned that you'd rather pick that. Why is it the case?
Well, you asked me about recovery.
I see.
And not longevity.
So from performance standpoint.
Yeah, from a performance standpoint. But yes, my dream is for my parents to have their own sauna and get into the sauna every day, but they just will not. They hate the heat. Okay. My dad just turned 70. My mom is 65. When it comes to longevity, I would love them to be doing that on a daily basis rather than an ice bath for longevity purposes. But I'm looking at a 32-year-old athlete who's at their prime, they're at their peak. If I had to choose something to take away from their time, it would be the ice bath.
Follow-up question, and I just thought somebody mentioned Tom Brady. Maybe it was Darsh. I don't know if it was the man in the arena. He was talking about 2017 or whenever there was the thing about his own personal trainer couldn't be in there. Do you guys remember that? Like, his trainer couldn't work out with the anyways, he's got his own guy, right? And who's been with him, done his massage therapy, all that kind of stuff. But there was a whole thing where the Patriots staff's training recovery philosophy differed than his.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you work with athletes primarily on an individual basis. Is that fair?
Correct.
How often do you find that struggle where an athlete will follow Louisa's protocol? However, the team training staff, team medical staff have different philosophies. And how do you handle that?
Well, here's the thing. There is an NBA team now that, because I was working with so many of their players, I now work with the actual medical staff of that team, pretty much because their medical team just did not really understand any of the precision medicine things that we do at Neuroathletics. And this comes down to politics. And this is something that once I have a bit more time, I'm still finishing board certification in intraoperative neurophysiology. Once I finish that, I dare say that I'll be out there speaking about the public health system and the public policies when it comes to NFL, especially when it comes to the concussion protocol. But not just that, like, what are they doing? Like, what are the staff mandates? And you have to look at, why is it like this? You have to look at, for an NBA team, they're all owned by individuals. It goes up the ranks. So if it's the medical staff, they've got to adhere to this person and then this person and this person and then this person. So you've got to look at who's at the top and who's running the show. And so more often than not, you would admit, when you go to medical school, those 4 years, pharmacology, you're getting the bare essentials to really go out and understand this. I talk to a lot of physicians. Actually, I talk to physicians every single day. Just here in Australia, I had to go to my doctor. She's been treating me for a very long time. She's 67. She goes, "Oh, Louisa, I follow you now on, social media." She goes, "I don't even know what you talk about." I go, "Well, so to be actively involved in these things, to understand this, it takes a lot of time. And between patient notes and seeing 30, 40 patients, how are you supposed to do that and have a family?" So these people don't really know, a lot of them, unless you're really actively involved in precision medicine and research, you're really just doing your job. So it's hard for them to get on board with mainstream medicine, which is getting into a cold bath. Like my physician here my GP she'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Like, so it's very hard. Yeah. And that comes down to public health, right? Or politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so touching on politics, touching on the culture of sports, right? And I know a lot of NBA players, for example, in the last 3 years have kind of come out about the schedule saying, hey, we need to space things out. And obviously there is a division, right, between money that can be made by the fans watching more, right? So now we have an extra week in the NFL versus player safety. Who do you think is kind of on top right now? I mean, obviously by what we're seeing, it seems like it's the higher up saying, we're gonna sacrifice our player safety maybe. But do you think we'll see the culture change somewhat?
No.
Moving forward?
No, because that means for it to change, you have to take a year. And it's a season's not NBA playoffs isn't going to go for that long. So we will always, for the health of the economy, unfortunately, be choosing money over player safety. Like I said earlier, and I stand by this, even if I had to get fired from working with all NFL athletes, I stand by the fact that you do have a death wish, because that's what it really is.
So is there anything that the NFL can do to change that answer of yours? Or do you think regardless, it's just the way the sport plays?
Get rid of how the game is played and not have tackles. So that would not be a sport, right?
I see. All right, I got you.
Yeah.
Do you feel as strongly about rugby as well?
So everyone asks me that because I'm in Australia. I do. Yeah, I do. I'm actually going to see the head of the Australian Brain Bank next week, Michael Buckland, wonderful man. And he's very, so it's the same thing. They're just, they don't have helmet. Oh, no, they don't have helmets like the NFL.
So I do want to ask you, right? You mentioned the challenge of trying to stay on top of the evidence, trying to be informed, but having difficulty, right? For somebody who's busy. I mean, you're that person. I know I've heard you talk about multiple times how you don't compromise in your sleep, right? You need at least 8 hours, I think I've heard you say. But at the same time, you are up to date on the evidence, right? You mentioned you're setting for your boards again soon. But at the same time, self-care is extremely important to you, and you seem to do a pretty good job with that. Well, how do you do it?
That you see on the outside. No, look, I do pride myself on, look, I've never been a drinker, evidently don't take any drugs or heavy alcohol. I'll have a wine with my dad, more culturally, but in New York, I hardly drink. And, I don't have kids, which is great. I'm in a relationship and we do have to sacrifice a lot. I say, no, we can't be going out, 3-4 times a week. And so, I do every single moment is optimized. And unfortunately, during the triathlon, the reason why I think it was very dear to my heart is because I did give up a lot. When you're a triathlete, and going to university, I gave up a lot of weddings. I lost a lot of friends. I had I had probably like 3 relationship breakdowns because, they couldn't seem to understand that I needed to ride on a Sunday morning. So you do have to choose your battles. When you're in your early 30s, I don't know how old you both are, but when you've gone through, all of your 20s, you've kind of find out, great, I've got, 5 best friends, and most of my friends are now married with kids. So they've got their own thing going on. So you don't lose friendships anymore because you don't need to be with them 24/7. So I just do what I have to do. I will never compromise. Dedicating my life to medicine and the brain is my life. Like I live and breathe it. And then everything else outside of that until I have kids really comes second. So, yeah.
Yeah. I got to ask this, Louisa. I know you've recently had an Instagram post, and I'm sorry I didn't get to actually check it out in depth, but it was about how there's, I think, a new study showing that there's no such thing as having too much sleep. And I know sometimes you post having like 10 and a half hours, and I'm like, damn, I'm jealous. I think it's just I just think we need to talk about that a little bit, because I know there's this thought out there saying that if you have too little or too much, it's not good. What did this study exactly say?
The study said that, yes, you actually can't mechanistically or clinically, there is no such thing as too much sleep, but that means that, no disease states can be really formed by too much sleep. However, little sleep, such as 6 hours or less a night, you can get a lot of different things being, occur during that time, upregulation, downregulation of certain genes. So that's pretty much, where the base of that is. But what I was saying with the Instagram reel was, while we know this, while this is not going to cause, drastically any type of, disease, we do have to take caution, because if you do spend too much time in bed, you are going to feel a bit lethargic. You may not feel motivated to get up. So I think there is a sweet spot. I believe like LeBron needs 11 to 12 hours of sleep. Okay.
Yeah.
body mass, plus what he's doing cognitively, plus what he's doing, physically. But somebody like me, I would definitely say that my average should be, I wish it was 9 hours. I wish that was my average. I just won't get there yet. Eventually, maybe I will, unless I'm extremely strict.
Yeah, and thank you for kind of elaborating on that. I think that I've heard Dr. Matthew Walker talk about this, and just people saying exactly for those reasons, that in terms of the correlations that they had noted that folks who were sleeping, I think maybe the study that I'm thinking of was published in one of the cardiology journals, that beyond 10, maybe 11 hours, increased mortality. They saw that, and his explanation for that was that essentially the body was trying to fight these illnesses, right? But ultimately had lost, despite the increased need for sleep for the reparative process, many of that you've mentioned, from a neurological standpoint as well. So I think that's worth noting as well.
I love that. Look, it's there's still so much to be discovered. I think that's the most exciting thing about medicine, the fact that it changes every day, the fact that there's new technologies being invented. So, yeah.
All right. So I think that we have talked at length about the benefits of sleep, how it affects performance, both positively and negatively. And I think that we've talked about it a couple of times before. So I think most people have really started to appreciate it. And, as much as I would love to work with folks in an ideal environment, people don't come to see us in clinic, when things are going great. That's just the culture of medicine in this world, right? We don't do a lot of preventative medicine. We don't do a lot of healthcare. But I've also firsthand now experienced with a newborn that sometimes in reality, it's hard to get 7-8 hours of sleep. So, my question for you is, how do you work with folks who have these barriers? I mean, of course you do this with folks where their jobs dictate that, right? High profile athletes, but then you have everyday life things as well. Children, job stresses, right? That kind of stuff like that. What kind of things do you look at to optimize so you can buffer the negative effects of sleep loss?
We have a jet lag protocol at Neuroathletics. So we manage a lot of that with, we've got, I wouldn't even say that the athletes are the crazy ones with this. I would say that my portfolio managers, one day I'll have a meeting booked in, let's say Tuesday night, and I've spoken to them on Monday. Tuesday night, I ring them and they're in Italy. I'm like, they're like, had to get on here last minute flight, had to get here. I'm just like, okay, investors, like that's they're living a crazy life. Sometimes some of them, I've got one who's on if he makes a wrong move, he's got I think it was 50 billion in assets. If he makes a wrong move, it could cost this family $50 million. I'm just really crazy things. And I'm like, okay. So that's a stressful moment. How do we buffer that? I do a lot of things where I put in protocols at 1 p.m. where we see most of the slumps happen in performance. I get them to meditate for 10 minutes, or I get them to do breath work or yoga nidra. I just get them to just be still, shut everything off, close your damn eyes. Even if I have to put tape on your eyes, and just be still for 10 minutes. And that helps a lot. That helps to buffer. And I think there's a lot of studies that show that you can mimic 4 hours of sleep or close to that via 20 minutes of meditation. So we try and, hone that into them as a protective mechanism.
Yeah. We have some 40 to 60-year-olds who also listen to this podcast. And I've been wanting to ask you this in terms of the cognitive decline. Are there any easy exercises that you can recommend, whether it's through reflexes, visual acuity, that people can do on a daily basis to prevent?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We're actually, 4 years ago when I got super excited, we brought out these things called neuro balls. I should probably change that. But we're going to, I'm such a kid, but there will be, we will be doing that again. But literally all you have to do is get a tennis ball, okay, and just throw it to the wall and see how many, throws overhand. It's like that neural reflex, overhand throws, catching it with the ball just to the wall, and then change it up. Just do left hand for a minute, then do right hand for a minute, then do left, right, left, right. The amount of hand-eye coordination and reflexes and visual acuity that goes into just that small thing is amazing. And yes, I will be bringing out some neuro balls very soon.
Very cool. I saw Peter Tia do this actually. Is there a certain distance you recommend staying away from the wall, or is it just Hey, just have
I
fun
always
with
say
it.
a meter away.
Meter away. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's so easy and so underappreciated because you think, well, what's it? Try it. I beg everybody to go out there and try it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Altamash, any questions for you? I mean, I'm wrung out here in my head, but this has been awesome so far.
No, this has been tremendous. I really want to thank you for not only coming here and educating us and our audience, but also just all the good work that you do. I mean, your podcast is incredible. We'll link that. We're of course going to ask you what else is going on in your world coming in, with the exception of Neuroballs. Well excited about that.
You've heard it here first.
But I just want to thank you. I think
thank
for
you,
being a
guys.
sleep champion. As well. I mean, it's incredibly important, but also, giving a lot more love to this noggin that we all share. I think something really profound that I don't know if you said it or somebody said it that you were a guest on, is the brain is the only organ that's aware of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that one I thought was pretty amazing for us to really appreciate. Right. I mean, and I don't know if it makes it more or less important. I think you'll argue that it does, but I think that was pretty cool. And I think it's really important for us to start appreciating it.
Absolutely. No, thank you guys. You guys are awesome. I love talking to you. It's so nice being interviewed by doctors because we can have this great conversation. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. And again, I think we first met on Clubhouse in those rooms, and it was just awesome to connect with you then. And then, following you on Instagram at the Diamond Boss. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, we'll link it in there. But no, it's just been amazing, as Ultimate said, just seeing your journey and kind of seeing everything that you do. And I'm super excited and pumped to see what's next for you. But tell the listeners, is there anything that's coming up for you that you're excited about?
Look, we do have a lot of, we're going to be doing a lot of tours. We're doing a tour in February. I've got a lot of athletes in Miami. We're going to go there and do some content with them. Sign up to our newsletter. We have a free newsletter that goes out each week, neuroathletics.substack.com. I'm going to now also be doing a very short clip YouTube channel just to introduce some of the interviews that we do. Probably won't be long form, just some of the important things that we do. So stay tuned. And obviously, look, everyone heard about the launch of Neuroballs. So
yeah,
that's going to be coming out soon too. Yeah.
And your podcast is called
The Neuro Experience.
And we'll definitely link that as well.
Yeah.
All right. Last question for you here. Last question we ask all our guests. How do we put the health back in healthcare? And I know Australia might be a little different than the US, so you can take it globally or US, whichever way you want to take it. But how do we put the health back in healthcare?
I think that the best way to do that is via education. I think the only way out is via education. If we're in a perfect world and we've got a shortage of doctors in Australia, in a perfect world, doctors would be seeing 2 or 3 patients a day because they'll not only be attending to them, but they'll also be educating them, and that takes a long time. So I think that's how we put the health back in healthcare.
That's right. I mean, it's education and teaching. It's in the word, right?
Yeah.
The
there you go.
word.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks guys.
Lisa.
Cheers.
All right. I really hope you enjoyed that episode. If it was your first or maybe even second or third time listening to it, again, Louisa is just full of information. She's a good friend, an ally, and someone that I frequently visit in terms of her social media pages just to get more information and keep up to date. She's got a newsletter, a podcast. She's always putting out good videos. So I'm going to make sure to link all of her socials, her websites, her podcast, and everything else that she is a part of in our show notes. So that way you can click on it and get the same information that I do to make sure that I'm optimized in terms of my brain health as well as athletic performance. I really want to thank our team, Ethan Ju, Harita Yepuri, and Iman Bashiri. Without them, this podcast would not be possible. So thank you so much to them. And of course, our medical disclaimer. Everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, and we are not providing medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician regarding any specific health-related issues. And lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it. Please share it to anyone you know that would also enjoy it, as that helps us get our reach out there to the entire world. All right, take care.